This is Business Law for Everyone, where I bring you answers to some of the most commonly asked questions from clients. My name is Zack Schick, and I am a practicing attorney in the state of Oregon. Now, with every good attorney comes a good disclaimer. This is not direct legal advice to your specific and unique situation, and I am not your attorney. Laws and rules change over time and vary by jurisdiction. My goal is to give access to information that people do not have the resources or time to get otherwise. With that, let's get into the episode. This episode will be about startup financing, and we're going to begin kind of a series that will dive deeper as we go along, but this is going to be more of a broad overview of startup financing. I've brought along Mick Harris, an attorney at Tonkentorp, to talk about this. Mick, why don't you just give a little quick background about yourself and your experience so the people listening will trust what you have to say later.
That's a fair point. I'm a little sad that you didn't introduce me as a dear friend and colleague, but just
That's true,
a
too.
faceless attorney at Tonkentorp.
I was trying to be professional.
That's fair. Well, I do admire your ever-present professionalism, Zach. So I have been an attorney at Tonkentorp since 2019, working in the general corporate practice, and in the last few years have honed that focus specifically to startup companies, venture capital, growth and companies, etc. And that's been really, really delightful because you have an amazing opportunity to work with local small and medium-sized businesses and occasionally even larger businesses, but you really see sort of how these ideas grow into actual flourishing ventures. And to me, that's been a really exciting way to practice law.
Right on. Are you ready to start up or talk about startup financing?
I thought you said, are you ready to start your own business? I was like, sure.
Well, that too.
Let's do that.
I mean, running a little law practice, even in a firm, is kind of like starting your own business, right?
Yeah, there's an entrepreneurial quality,
Always
unavoidably.
But you don't typically have to raise your own cash. And that's what we're here to talk about. Now, I want to set up the basic scenario. We'll get more complicated as the series progresses, but for right now, let's say you have a solo person, or maybe they're in a pair or group, and they have a business idea. And unlike other business ideas, this one requires some money. It requires some startup capital. And I want to go into, what kind of entity would they set up to raise capital if one's needed? And B, where does the initial money come from? So as a first step, does it matter, do they need a business entity, one? And does it matter what kind?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. And a lot of people, once they have come up with that business idea and they want to formalize it, are facing that same exact question and don't know where to start, which is why it's always good to talk to one of the fine attorneys at Tonkentorp. But really, to answer the first question, do they need an entity? I would say, based on our system and the legal framework in which we operate businesses, it is absolutely advisable because it creates a lot of protections for that person and separations from how they're living their day-to-day life and, the money in their personal bank accounts to what they're doing on behalf of the business, so that if things go sideways, or worst case scenario, they end up in some sort of knockdown, drag-out lawsuit, they're not going to be inherently personally liable, though of course there are circumstances in which they could be. But if you take for granted the idea that they should have a business entity, then the question becomes, what type of entity? And we can dive deeper, as you mentioned, on future episodes into what exactly they need to be considering. But most founders are going to either form an LLC, a limited liability company, or a corporation. And corporations have existed since the Dutch East Indies Company, and limited liability companies are a much more recent sort of American invention. But in either instance, to your next question, once you've formed an entity and determined what's going to be the best fit, you want to make sure that you are raising money in a way that is legally compliant, proper for your own purposes, insofar as making sure that you're getting the amount you need from the people who are best positioned to be supporting your business as it grows, and making sure that you're following all the legally compliant considerations with respect largely to securities laws, of which there are both state and federal securities laws, and you don't want to get crosswise of those. At the end of the day, you do want to have an entity in place in, the vast majority of circumstances, because it's going to provide liability protection. It's going to also, and very critically, give confidence to any potential investor that you are genuinely building a company in a way that makes sense, sort of based on our rules of engagement in this modern world.
Great. Okay, so let's take it for granted now that we have an entity, whether it's a corporation or an LLC, and I would love to dive deeper into that, but for purposes of right now, you have one of the two, and you need money. So where does your initial money come from?
Well, almost necessarily, for most founders, whether it's a small group of people, a single person, a pair, it starts with money that's coming directly out of their own pocketbooks.
Okay.
And that's important. I mean, it may not be that that's sufficient to actually build and manufacture the first widget, or get the software developed and the app online, but you want to have skin in the game. It's important to investors, to your co-founders, and it's a sign that you care. And maybe you aren't ponying up $100,000 out the gate. Maybe you're ponying up a few $1,000s and countless late nights, early mornings, and sessions of hitting your head against the wall because you're putting in as much sweat equity and trying to build the next great business. And it does matter to at least start with yourselves and then look to investors in a more traditional sense.
That's a really good point. So if you have a buddy that comes to you and asks you for 10 grand, and you're like, well, what have you done so far? And they say, well, nothing. I need some money first. And might be skeptical of how they might be invested in this company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the same way you have to put a down payment on a house mortgage.
Yeah.
In most instances, you're not going to get something for nothing without showing that, and you need to show that you actually will benefit from the upside as much as you'll suffer the consequences of the downside.
Okay, that makes sense. So you started this business, you put in as much as you feel comfortable with. I mean, you're not going to deplete your entire life savings, but you got some skin in the game, you got some sweat equity too. And, well, we already mentioned your buddy, so now what do you go to next? You go to your friends? You go to your family? Is that typical?
Hey, that is typical. You'll often hear about the friends and family round. And this is that first initial foray into the investor world. And it is pounding the pavement, making phone calls, talking to the people in your network, whether it's people close to you, the family component, or, friends or friends of friends. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a course that a lot of people proceed through. But I think that it's also important to know that anytime you're taking on investment capital, there are significant compliance and regulatory considerations that you want to have your arms around. And so, because even your friends and family, whom you have great faith in and whom have great faith in you, may be the easiest ones to go after, so to speak, for some of those initial dollars, we always recommend that you try to only take investment capital from accredited investors, which are investors who meet certain financial criteria, because it reduces the liability and helps ensure that you are in a position to avoid certain initial securities law pitfalls that you'd rather avoid.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong then. So you have a friend and he has 10 grand left in his savings account. He's kind of on his last leg, but he wants to help out. He's into investing. He believes in you. He wants to give you this money. He's going to make tenfold. He believes in your product. You're saying that's a bad idea to take his last 10 grand?
It sure sounds like a bad idea to me.
Okay.
And while his belief is very valuable, the potential risk of running him out of house and home for what is probably not going to help all that much is greater than whatever upside you get from having your buddy next to you as an investor. But, you can always bring advisors and consultants on, and maybe they're not being compensated initially in equity. Maybe you are issuing options. In some instances, you might be issuing restricted stock. The difference between we can discuss, in a future episode. But there's ways to incentivize the people around you whom you really want to be around you without necessarily carving off big chunks of your company and or taking on significant amounts of their money, or however big the amount may be, what's significant to them, and increasing the risk of any sort of discomfort, fallout with your friends, family, your relationships, and actual technical, strict legal liability.
Okay, that's a really good point. Yeah, you can involve people in many other ways. And so instead of going to that friend, you might go, where you're talking about accredited investors, you go to another friend who has whatever the threshold is. Say they have 300 grand in liquid cash and they want to give you 10. Like maybe that's not the exact definition, but that's more along the point. Is that right?
Yeah. The current accredited investor definition is someone who has a net worth of over $1 million, not including their primary residence, or income over $200,000 individually, or $300,000 if you're including the income of their spouse or partner in each of the last 2 years, and they reasonably expect the same for the current year. And there's some other criteria for entities rather than individuals who might be investing. At the end of the day, these are people who are not going to be in the same sort of, or at least shouldn't be in the same sort of financially susceptible position as someone who, as you mentioned earlier, is on their last 10 grand and they're going to give away every dime of it to you.
Yeah, if they lost that money, they're going to survive.
That's at least, the way that the system supposes it would go. And so, it's important to abide by that, because regardless of whether that magic number that's determined by the SEC every few years is infallible, at the end of the day, you are going to get certain legal benefits from only taking investments on from the type of investors who are deemed quote unquote sophisticated, and in this case the accredited investors would qualify.
I want to keep diving into this, both the friends and family, what kind of documentation you might need, and also once that money runs out, where do you go to next, whether it's your own income in the business or other investors that you don't know personally. But I think that's a good stopping place for this intro episode. To get this series started, is there any, final, to put you on the spot, right? Any final parting words?
Only that I can't wait to discuss the wild and wacky world of convertible notes, run-of-the-mill promissory notes, safes.
Oh boy.
Priced rounds.
Yeah.
Seed rounds. The rabbit hole goes deep, and while it can feel intimidating and make your head spin if you haven't been acquainted, let alone in sort of the trenches with these concepts before, it's really exciting to see how these various investment models and legal frameworks can really lead to incredible business success, and I'm looking forward to diving deep with you.
All right. I love that. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Zack.